Hey everyone, welcome back to the fish room. We're coming over to this corner of the basement today where I'm going to do some intentional damage to one of my favorite setups. I'm going to destroy about a year's worth of progress and hard work here in the Mangrove Aquarium, stocked with albino threadfin acara. I'm going to absolutely decimate this thing, but I promise it's for a good reason. You see, today is pruning day for the mangrove trees, and this will actually be the first large-scale pruning I've done for them. Up to this point, I've done small snips here and there, but I've really been trying to encourage big growth, big gains vertically and horizontally, anything I can get. But that has actually been a big mistake, and I'm going to tell you why. But before that, you need to first understand how mangrove trees grow. How do they sprout new branches and new leaves? Let's get up close and personal with these mangrove trees to learn a little bit more. For this purpose, we need to know about three parts of the mangrove. The stem, which is like the branches. Then we have the nodes. This is where leaves sprout from, as well as other branches. So this is a node, this is a node, and then we have the buds. That is, at the end of the nodes, the beginning stages of leaf development. And these buds, as they grow older, they begin to unfurl and open up new leaves. So like this one right here. This one has recently unfurled. And sometimes when they unfurl, you see that not only had new leaves been growing, but also the beginnings of new branches. And then those branches will grow until they sprout buds of their own. The important thing to know about mangroves is new growth only develops, buds only develop at terminal nodes, sometimes called apical nodes. And those are nodes at the end of the branches. So said another way, new leaves and branches can only sprout from the ends of existing branches. And that's very different from most trees that can develop auxiliary nodes or lateral nodes along the stem. Mangrove trees just can't do that, or at least they don't do it very often. Now that creates a problem if we're growing mangroves in aquarium where we have, limited space up top above the tank, because mangroves in nature, they grow, they're trees, right? They grow 20, 30 feet tall. So they're always naturally going to try to get as much growth, as much distance as they can in these internodes. The internode is the space between nodes, because they're trying to grow up towards the sunlight, right? But in homes, we don't have a ton of space. So what we're looking for is tight growth, where we have a lot of foliage in a very confined area, because that's going to give us the biggest bang for our buck in terms of aesthetics with space used. So that is why pruning is so important, because when you prune a bud, and I'll show you how to do that here in a minute, it is much more likely to sprout new branches, and those new branches are more likely to develop a nice tight foliage, like this specimen right here. This is a better example of what I want. This specimen right here, while it is big, it's magnificent, right? It's tall, it's wide, it's spreading out, but it's not dense. The foliage it's pretty bare in spots. It has one good branch here, but the biggest branches are pretty sparse. So what I want to do is trim this down and try to trim it down pretty far and try to encourage much more dense growth. So here is how you do that. Now another note here is these are red mangroves. Everything I'm saying applies only to red mangroves, which is 95% of the mangrove trees you'll find in the aquarium hobby. Some people in the United States, at least, might have black mangroves or white mangroves. But hey, if you're interested in learning about how to tell the difference between the types of mangroves, figuring out what kind you have, just let me know and maybe I can make a video on that in the future. To prune your mangroves, you don't need anything fancy, just a basic pair of hand shears. Just make sure that they're reasonably sharp and clean so that you get a nice clean cut on the stems. What's most important is knowing where to cut. And what you want to do is cut just above a node. Now this can be the terminal node where the bud is growing, or it can be further along the branch. But we want to cut right above where the leaves had popped out. Another rule to follow is that you don't want to cut more than, say, 10% of the foliage at any given time. Full-grown trees out in nature, they recommend 20%. Since these are still pretty young specimens and they're, in an aquarium, I'm going to follow a self-imposed rule of 10%. So as I go through this, I'm going to make sure I'm not taking too much off at once. And on this tree, I think long-term, I want to bring it down to here. But because I'm following this 10% rule, I think that would be too much at once. So I'm going to start up here and give it some time to rebound. And eventually, I'm going to work my way down to this node in stages. So let's go ahead and make the first cut. We're going to snip as close to the node base as we can get without actually cutting into it. And here we go. And it's done. And part of me freaks out a little bit when I do this because it's like, wow, that took so long just for those leaves, that section to grow, and I just ruined it. But trust me, it's a good thing long term because eventually a new bud will grow from here and sprout new leaves and maybe even new branches. Now on this specimen, of course, I'm going to cut it down even further. And I'm going to make similar cuts on the other upper branches to encourage thicker growth. Snip. Oh man, I kind of freak out a little bit. And I'm going to come through and snip a lot of the smaller ones as well, because I want to encourage new bud growth that might result in new branches, because I don't want these smaller ones to get too tall before they start branching out. Okay, so that's it for today. Maybe I didn't decimate the tank, but that's just because I want to give it a little time to rebound before I cut it back even further. Over the next several months, I'm going to be cutting a lot of these down pretty significantly. But again, the goal is to get thicker, more lush growth long term. So I look forward to seeing how it turns out and sharing it with you guys along the way. Thanks again, everybody. I'll leave you with one last shot of the albino threadfin acara, who are just kind of chilling. All right, take it easy. See you next time.